Hi, I'm Bianca Prince. Welcome to Slop Happens, a podcast about technology and what can go wrong.
Hi, I'm Claudio, and welcome to Slop Happens, our new podcast on technology and how it can fail. You know that moment when a piece of smart technology does something that makes absolutely no sense? Or maybe your smart whatever is doing the right thing, but there's something really off about it. A lot of it comes from technology that makes mistakes more often than we know. These little glitches feel harmless until they aren't. Like a facial recognition app that can't handle people with really dark skin, or a recruiting app that forces you into an interview with a bot, or fraud detection that flags your family support money as money laundering. Because the truth is, the more we rely on these systems, the quicker the weirdness can lead to serious consequences. Suddenly, our lives are full of technology that is asking us to make really strange trade-offs. It could be swapping your family's private information for some benefit they really need, or stuffing your resume with keywords and skills to get past the AI for your next job. Should we trust the output? Can we override these systems? Or even, should we? Should we let an automated decision stand when something feels off? Have we left ourselves ways to override a bot's decision or rating? The hard thing is, most of us don't have a playbook for this. We are never trained for a world where half-baked tech and slop quietly run our lives. We don't have the tools or even the vocabulary to deal with all the ways tech can go sideways. And this is why we created Slop Happens. We wanted to look at this place where innovation is exciting, messy, unpredictable, and sometimes risky, and ask what it means for real people. Because when tech doesn't deliver, things get weird quickly. And that weirdness is where the real stories are. So, Bianca, a few months ago, I was out on my bike. I'm usually out in the evenings. It's awesome down here. You know, I've got this bike trail that I love that goes through the woods. And if you're out around sunset, you start seeing animals like rabbits and, you know, even Florida panthers and stuff, you know, before sunset. And I'm out, it's in the evening, one Thursday night, and I see in this open stretch, I see this really trippy psychedelic cloud up there. And I'm going like, okay, Claudio, maybe something's up with your eyes or something. It's this cloud that looked like as if somebody had shot off fireworks and there are all these glittering pieces and stuff inside of it. And it's swirling too. So I'd never seen anything like this, and it's moving. And it keeps on moving from the west sky. It keeps on just going steadily across the sky, and it disappears off to the east. And I'm going like, this is really bizarre. I've never seen anything like this. Is this something that exploded? Is there? So I go home and try to see on the internet that night, has anybody else spotted something like this? Didn't really see anything. The next morning, I start seeing reports that there was a SpaceX launch that had gone up the night before. About 8.5 minutes into the launch, they lost control of it, and the thing starts spinning around. And so it's up about 90 miles up in space. It starts spinning around and spinning around so fast that it starts breaking up into little pieces of metal. And so what I was seeing was actually this large SpaceX rocket that had just fallen apart, what they call a rapid unannounced disassembly. And it had fallen apart, and the pieces were flying over Florida, and they were coming down into the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos. And as they went over, none of us civilians were notified of this, but they were canceling flights out of Miami, out of Fort Lauderdale, out of Orlando, out of Palm Beach. So you've got like 4 major airports, 3 of these at least, which are like really like international hubs, being shut down because of this launch.
Without
And you've
any
got
public warning.
Nothing, I would have expected something like this. Okay, maybe you have an Amber Alert, in the States where you get everybody in a certain area starts getting like these loud tones on their phones with these sort of alerts that start appearing. There was none of that. And I imagine the folks in the Bahamas and the Turks and Caicos didn't get any sort of warning either. So it's almost like the only way we would have known is if we were actually monitoring that launch. And so, yeah, if you're watching YouTube and you're watching the live stream of the launch, you can see it and you can connect the two. And it's interesting to watch the stream anyway, because you see it goes up, you've got people cheering loudly as the rocket goes off. The first stage comes off, it's prepped so that it can come down and be caught by the tower. People are cheering as it comes down later. And then a couple seconds later, they start losing attitude control. The thing starts spinning, the top stage starts spinning out of control, and you've got silence. So you've got silence on the video because either nobody is speaking up, or, I imagine if I were in the control room, I'd be yelling, "Oh fuck, what is going on?" Or there would be like a lot of activity. The announcers,
you're not allowed to do that in the U.S. Screaming.
You're not allowed to do that. Or if you want to keep your job at SpaceX, you cannot show emotion. And they're on the video. They're cutting pictures. They're cutting back and forth to the folks in the control room, and they're just kind of leaning a little bit more into their monitors. So they must hire the most poker-faced engineers there to be watching this. And I also imagine there's got to be one of them that every minute that this is in flight, the responsible thing to do would be you have somebody there who knows exactly what to do if something goes wrong, say minute 6 versus something goes wrong minute 9. And you've basically, if you have debris coming down, you're going to know that instance where that debris is supposed to be coming down, so you can alert authorities on this. And it just didn't seem like there was any of that.
But that was weird. I mean, if you had anything like that, even with what you saw recently a few times in Europe, that there's drones over an airport,
right,
people get alerted for that. So it's really weird that A, you didn't get an alert. B, what I think is even more interesting, and that was also based on what we're going to talk about, is I was watching this video you shared on this in the rewind, and I was like, okay, if I look at what's happening there, it's not just interesting about the fact that the whole thing exploded. It's more the whole effect of what happens there. It's the part of, okay, this can happen. This is a failure. We can do this again, without the realization of the impact, what it has on the environment. So you see not any form of compassion for the people living in the area where the rocket exploded, meaning there could be debris on their homes. There's not any recognition for the impact on the environment, on the nature, and I'm surprised by that. I mean, if I, even as a small entrepreneur, do anything, I have to think about what is the impact on the people I work with? What is the impact on the people who are affected by this product? There is no sense of urgency to think about your environment in this whole video. And it's only about, it feels a little bit sensational.
Well, yeah. I mean, the video is essentially you're cheerleading a space launch. So this is like a big tech triumph. And so, but SpaceX, they're on essentially what used to be a wildlife refuge in the south of Texas, and it's barrier islands, with lots of marshes around them, lots of protected bird species, and you get these launches which just start blasting hot air down below, and it does have an incredible impact on the actual marshes themselves and the wildlife there. And you see, for instance, photos maybe I'll find one and upload it. You'll see photos of birds' nests that have been obliterated by the launches, and you just see streaks of like egg yolks, in the sand and that sort of thing. So there is definitely an impact. We've just awarded SpaceX another, I think, like 780 acres of additional land to be able to expand their facility there. So there's that lack of concern. But bringing it back, like on a human side, you've got debris that's coming down over populated areas.
Yeah, exactly.
And at some point or another, maybe they must have known, well, okay, the folks in Miami, you're going to see fireworks going over you, but it's not going to land on you. Or, oh, well, it's just the Bahamas, what do we care? Like who's out there, they're not Americans. They're not going to sue us. There's just this sort of callousness.
But that's an interesting one, Claudia. If you look at it, and I'm not a U.S. citizen, so maybe you can explain this to me. If SpaceX, it's a business, it's private owned, they only have commercial interests. If they do this, it's completely different than it is a government organization where taxpayers pay the money. But
right.
Don't they have any obligation to protect the environment, to protect the people, to warn the people that in case there's an issue? Don't they have anything? Is the only way to do is a civil lawsuit? Is there not any protectional law for the people living in the area which could be impacted?
Oh, you've kind of got me in a corner here because, yes, there are those in normal times, there are those checks and balances. And typically, it would be the role of, say, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, or the Department of Interior, or the Federal Aviation Administration. I mean, you have agencies that are part of the executive that would be typically enforcing regulations. And, we have an administration right now that just this is not one of their priorities, and it's not a concern of theirs. So I imagine, things are so partisan here in the States that if, say, the head of SpaceX were a Democrat, then they would be using all of this as a cudgel against that person. But, we live in very partisan times here in the States, and that sort of enforcement is very selective. So
that's an interesting one, because if you compare it to Europe, you have several obligations which are related to environmental impact. I mean, it's completely off topic, but in the Netherlands, it's hard to even build a house just because of the pollution. And that is just one thing. I mean, it's immense that it is possible that just because the government likes you, let's put it like that, and not make it a political conversation, but you're on the good side of politics, that you are allowed to do this without any form of consequence. And that is something that, for me as a European, is really hard to understand.
I mean, for me, like my parents were Latin American, they're from Argentina and Chile, and two countries that lived through autocracy and lived through this sort of partisanness. And so for me, it's something that I kind of grew up with, but didn't, I wasn't growing up in those countries. I grew up with it indirectly, through stories that would come from my family down there, and that sort of thing. But let me pivot back to our theme about technology and technology failing. Part of what really upset me about this, or part of what really impacted me about the SpaceX launch, was how you have a giant rocket blowing up and they're minimizing it. And they're minimizing it in this like really bland corporate way where you have a euphemism for everything. So let me read you the statement that went on X the next day explaining what had happened during this incident. So here it is. So during Starship's ascent burn, the vehicle experienced a rapid unscheduled disassembly and contact was lost. our team immediately began coordination with safety officials to implement pre-planned contingency responses. We will review the data from today's flight test to better understand root cause. As always, success comes from what we learned, and today's flight will offer additional lessons to improve Starship's reliability. Okay, you've got, first of all, an explosion, you've got a crash, and you're calling it a rapid unscheduled disassembly. Like, this is a ridiculous euphemism for something where, like, okay, you've got something blowing up the state. Just say it. Just say you blew it up. Then the other thing is, like, we'll review the data to better understand root cause. And it's like, oh, well, you know, hey, we lost the spacecraft, but no harm, no foul. It's a teachable moment. We're learning.
Yeah, but I don't understand that. I mean, I am a total fan of progress over perfection.
Right.
But when lives come into jeopardy, we have to put a stop on that. And we have to think about what's going to happen. I mean, we know things can go really bad when we talk about space aviation. I mean, everybody has seen the Apollo movies, and they're not based on, they're based on true stories. I mean, that is something that you say, you have to think about this. And evaluating outcomes, you cannot play with lives. And if there's debris coming down in a populated area, even if it's densely populated, it's still people's lives at risk. And you cannot just wave it away and say, hey, we learned, we got to evaluate, let's see it next time. I can't get that.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I wanted to talk to a little bit about human life and Starship. So, you know, this Starship launch and this large rocket, I presume that these very large rockets are what, you know, Elon, you know, in the future, what SpaceX in the future is going to be using to send people to Mars. So with the launches that we've had so far, you know, I did a little bit of digging, and about 55 to 60% of them have had some sort of major explosion or rapid unscheduled disassembly happen during them. And I can't imagine having a failure rate or an RUD rate, if you will, that's that high, and putting humans on top of a rocket like that and be like, you know, hey, what if I blow up? Am I going to be somebody else's teachable moment as I go up in a puff of smoke? I mean, to me, it's unconscionable that you can continue to send up rockets with this high of a failure rate and be, you know, this glib about it.
It sounds like a form of adaptive measuring. I mean, let's flip it around. Let's not talk about space, but think about it's a medicine testing. If you have a medicine and it's being tested and 1 out of 2 patients dies,
right,
it's not going to get approved.
Ever.
And how can you do it with this? And yes, I can say with failure, but there's a reason why, for example, testing with animals or medicines is reduced in a lot of countries because a lot of the animals suffered from that. Mm-hmm. So if we say, okay, we have to take better care of the environment, and we also have to do that, you cannot say that for one area and not take responsibility in the tech area. It seems like the race to space is one that overrules people, the environment, security of a lot of things that's going to happen. And it's something that we think like, okay, why do we measure this different for technology than we would do this for medicines? I mean, if the impact is loss of human life or bringing at risk human lives, it's huge.
You're hitting on so many good themes right there. So first of all, it's like, okay, how do you assess risk? And does risk in one area, does the upside of risk like say in the potential for space travel, justify the potential downside of stuff raining on populated centers. So you've got that dimension of it. So there's also the whole thing of like, do ethics in one aspect, like, is it medicine? Is it animal testing? Does that translate over to another aspect of human society or human endeavor? Like, to what point is ethics so relative and combined to a particular field? And I found this in business, for instance, where certain fields, it's okay to take kickbacks. It's okay to get a referral fee for giving somebody business. And then in other aspects, that's absolutely unethical. So I do feel like we may be finding that we're unraveling ethics that apply to one aspect of human endeavor, but don't apply somewhere else.
No, but I think what we see often is that if you look at ethical perspective, something has to go really wrong, and then we got to talk about ethics.
Right.
And maybe the whole thing with the SpaceX is that there's no lives lost yet. And as soon as a rocket blows up and there's people in there, then the ethical conversation starts. And what I don't get, if I look at these ethical discussions, why can we not start having these discussions before lives are lost?
Well, thank you. This is actually part of the real reason why I wanted to be able to have this podcast in the first case, is to be able to get us to the point where we have enough understanding, we have enough vocabulary and nuance to be able to hopefully make better decisions, and to be able to start these conversations happening before something tragic or before something awful happens. Mm-hmm. I want to jump back to SpaceX for a second, talk about the weirdness of the stuff that's raining down, the material debris. Now, if I were to have, say, a big chunk of SpaceX land in my yard and it happens to have the SpaceX logo on it, right? Mm-hmm. I would think, okay, that is like one important souvenir. I would be able to take that, put it up on eBay, auction it off, what have you, that it landed in my yard and therefore it becomes my property.
Have it, keep it, don't return it.
It is actually SpaceX property, even if it comes through my roof, even if it comes, causes damage here, that is still their property. And if I were to take that and try to sell it, or if I were to take that and take pictures of it and show it off on social media, there's a Florida law now on the books that I could be fined for dealing with stolen property.
It's not stolen. It fell into your backyard. It's like,
it's like, yeah, it fell into my backyard. I had no consent of this thing landing on my property, but that's how it works. And what's interesting is we've had something like this for decades going on with the space programs, like the Soviet space program, mm-hmm. the American space program, where if you have debris falling out of space, it still belongs to the country that launched it. So even the stuff that landed in Turks and Caicos, technically, if it was through the NASA space program, it would be the responsibility of Turks and Caicos, or it would be up to them to very politely and nicely return what they've recovered back to NASA.
Yeah, but on the other side, it was for political egos at the time. But that was about, in essence, it was about progress for research. It was about, it didn't have a commercial interest. And what I think is the big difference here is that if we look at that, such law, it sounds outdated if we talk about current views on space aviation, because it's SpaceX, it's Blue Origin, the other one, and they should have an obligation, because if we look at the legislation time, people were not so considerate of the environment. It was also it was during the Cold War, so there were different views on how we were viewing human lives and the value of human lives. I mean, there's a lot of lives lost in this whole process. And if you look at it, it does not make sense to base this on the ancient laws and say, okay, we don't have any form of responsibility because we are the government and we do this in protection of yours, because in essence that was the whole idea of those previous space programs. And this is about commercial gain. This is about being, yeah, you could say it in a muscular way, but let's keep it more practical. But who is the fastest? Who is the first one in space? Who gets the government contract and gets a lot of money? Because that's in essence what it's about. And I think if you put this in a commercial space, you should also put in the ethical responsibilities to take care of the people around it or the people impacted by this. And I think there again comes in, how do you view this? Because we know with today's knowledge that a lot of the research which has been done in the past did not benefit humans, it did not benefit the environment, it did not benefit social structures even. And we know all these things. And what we currently see, it's SpaceX shooting rockets, they blow up, and you don't have any responsibility to the environment. It's what we see within AI development with OpenAI and ChatGPT, for example, the suicide rates going up because people think they have a companion, but actually it's somebody talking you into death.
And we'll dive into that in detail.
Exactly, but it's more from this perspective, and where I'm talking now is about the responsibilities. And that's exactly why I want to do this podcast as a compliance expert. Because if I look at compliance, I'm not looking at just being compliant with the law. Because if you look at being compliant with the law, then you can say, okay, they're not responsible, we are compliant, we follow the law. But this law should be also good for the people living in the area. Meaning that, talking about SpaceX, you have to say, okay, you are responsible for what happens. So if you damage the environment, or if there's damage to Claudio's house because one part of the debris falls in whatever, your yard or your pergola, you should be compensated for that.
Right. And or even if the damage is the flight schedules. I mean, you closed 4 airports.
Yeah.
You know, the disruption to air travel. You know, if I were to disrupt one plane by standing up and shouting in the aisle, you know, I'd be going to jail for a couple of years. Yeah. But on the other hand, I could disrupt thousands of planes for a few hours and there's no consequence.
And the ones that are paying are actually the flight businesses. So the KLMs of the world and
exactly.
And in essence, it means that the people who are using air travel pay it because their ticket prices are going up. And that's what I mean. There's no responsibility for those commercial businesses who make a lot of financial profits out of this because it costs a lot of money. But on the other side, if you want to watch the launch, you have to pay. So that's those sort of things where I say, okay, people are gaining a lot of money over others. And I am coming from a world of finance, which has a very negative view, but I also know there's a lot of people like me who really think from an ethical perspective. Why don't we look at this with the same pink glasses as we look at the financial sector and say, hey, what are you doing for us? Why don't you protect us? You should act. And I just don't get it. And maybe I am, I don't know, too sweet for the world or something like that. But no, but and that's the thing. I mean, I know I'm quite soft on those topics, but on the other side, I think we need more people that look at these cases and think about, ethics, think about people, think about the environment, and think about, okay, if we have technology progressing, then we should make sure that it progresses for everybody instead of for the few, because we also know that the people who run these programs belong to the 1% that holds most of the money in the world.
Right.
And they because of that, they have a lot of power over other people. And the interesting part is, it seems like there's a free space. They have a sandbox, which is the size of the world. And it's always even trying to go beyond because people want to go to Mars. I mean, and on the one side, I'm like, okay, you know what, Elon, go to Mars. Maybe you're gone for a long while, so leave us alone. On the other side, I'm like, we already screwed up one planet. Why should we screw up another planet? I mean, what rights do we have? And let's first fix problems here. I mean, there's so many eminent problems we have to fix. And I think technology can be a fixer of a lot of these problems. I think technology can make the difference for so many people, for people with disabilities, for people aging, for a lot of the social problems we see. But for that, we also need that the big tech, and I'm not specifically aiming at a business, but the big influencers in the technology should think about, hey, we do this. There's a consequence coming out. We are taking responsibility because we made a huge mistake. And I think if I look at it with the knowledge I have today, I would say it would suit people like Elon and saying, I'm sorry, people, we screwed up. And everybody, maybe it's about fear of legal action when you say, I'm sorry, I fucked up.
Right, when you admit
I'm
to
sorry
fault.
for that word. But maybe it's about that. But in essence, what is the bad thing about saying, I'm sorry, I hurt you? Because that would make the world so much more open and receiving of, okay, a mistake happened, but this person took responsibility. Let's help him or her and see how it gets better. Instead, it's about all of money. I'm, you know, that's.
So let's pivot a little bit and talk about the sort of themes that we're going to cover, maybe, and talk about, how is it that people who work in big tech companies, or people who run big tech companies, or people who are entrepreneurs, I mean, what should they learn from? Is it about the fairness of the technologies that they're working with, that they benefit some and actually hurt others? Is it about handling slop, about handling inaccuracy with technologies, doing the wrong thing, recommending the wrong thing, making mistakes? Is it about how do you handle or look at the economic impacts? Is it how do you assess risk? I mean, these are all different topics that I hope we get to unpack over the course of this podcast, and that we get to give you case studies to. And
I would also like to add something. I think also the difference in regulations, because
100%.
we also look at regulations as something which blocks innovation. But I think it can also be looked at the guardrails of innovation to make sure that everybody benefits, that we don't hurt people in the process and think afterwards, oh, why did we do this? I think from a lot of these things you're listing are also related to that. And I would love to see how we can work on that and find out what are the positive sides of regulation, because there's a lot of fighting against regulations.
Right.
While on the other side, I'm also surprised by, for example, one thing I read this week is that actually China is looking at a regulation for AI, which is surprisingly high and looks quite a bit like what's happening in Europe. So even if you think about, hey, deregulation is the way to go to improve innovation, it's interesting to see that actually some of the countries that are seen as innovative start to regulate more and more. So
Right.
all the things we are talking about, I think they're also closely connected to how you view regulatory requirements.
So I am totally looking forward to being able to spend more episodes with you, have more of these conversations with you, Bianca, and where we can bring other people in and we can start unpacking some of these topics. So totally looking forward to doing this in the future.
I'm very curious too. And, it's so funny that we found each other on a conference on accessibility and decided to do this, because what started as, hey, let's do a podcast about Slappy AI, it's now a podcast about sloppy technologies. And I
Yes.
think, in essence, it all comes together. It's about technical, it's about ethics, it's about governance. And there's a lot to do and there's a lot to learn. And I really hope that we can bring people to think about what they're doing, because it's great to be an innovator, but it's even more fantastic to change a corporate in their course and find out that when you leave, it became more inclusive. And I
Being
know that
changed.
inclusive is a topic which is not popular everywhere. On the other side, we are different in this world, and everybody has their views. We have different cultures, we have different backgrounds, and all together we make this world. And technology brings us together. So we have to embrace diversity and inclusion in our technologies, because otherwise we cannot serve the planet. That simple it is.